believe we're ready to go. So again, I want to thank you all for being on tonight. My name is Patrick Davis, and you Extension Livestock Field Specialist. And tonight is going to be the last night of our workshop series. And tonight I'm going to be kind of conversational. There's a lot of slides. I sent those to you in a handout form ahead of time. I also sent a document from Auburn and Extension Services in Alabama that has nutrient requirements on it, and we'll actually use some information from that document. And I also sent you the A-test sheet, and we'll kind of go through that. You can look at that at your own leisure. But basically, we're just going to talk about sheep and goat winter nutrition and management, really focusing on late gestation nutrition and nutrition during lactation, since those would probably be the management that's going on during the winter months. And so again, I want to thank you for being on tonight. Did have a little difficulty with the Zoom, and got a new link sent out, so hopefully we get more people on once they get that new link. But Jennifer Lutz, she'll be on tonight. She'll be taking questions, and Susan Jasper will also be on, and so we'll be answering those questions. Like in the past, I've put together a YouTube video link. I'll try to do that tomorrow and get that put up. Also, in the email that I sent you this afternoon, there was also a link in there for an evaluation. It's an online evaluation. Basically, you fill it out, the information comes back directly to me. It's confidential, and it's a very nice way to get evaluation information. It's a Qualtrics survey. And so if you would please, when you get some time, fill that out. Questions? It's not very many questions. And so, and then also throughout the evening, if you have any topic suggestions or anything for later meetings or anything, you can put those in the chat. So, and of course, like always, if you have any questions or anything, just kind of put those in the chat, and we'll try to answer those as best we can when we can. But as I said tonight, tonight's going to be kind of conversational, and you have the slides, and so we're probably not going to really go in depth on all the slides, but basically, what I want to talk about tonight is kind of in this beginning slide here, and this is just kind of an intro slide and basically we talk about sheep and goat nutritional management. Basically, we're just going to go through what I would work with a producer or Jennifer or Susan, as far as what we would work with on a producer on putting together a feeding plan. And that's something on your operation. We've got people from all over the US that are signed up for this. So that feeding plan is going to look a lot different depending on where you're at and what you have available. And that's kind of the first bullet point there. And we're going to talk about forage testing, feed ingredient analysis, those kind of things. Feed testing is something you should do on your forages periodically, or your feeds, your supplements, those kind of things, just to kind of know what you have. And then we're not going to spend a lot of time in each of those nutrient requirements, but animals require all these things. They require water, energy, protein, minerals, trace minerals, and vitamins. And so water being the most important one, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about energy and protein tonight, because when you look at late gestation and early lactation, um, those are the one, really energy is going to be the one that's probably in most instances going to be deficient. And so with that, energy and protein, those are the things we're going to talk about a lot tonight. Minerals, trace minerals, and vitamins are important, and we'll touch a little on those. And then the development of the ration, or how do we figure it out? How do we decide what we're going to feed them and how we're going to feed them, and those kind of things. There's various ways to do that tonight. I just did it simply with an Excel spreadsheet. There's ration balancing software. There's the Pearson Square. Some of you may have heard of that. That's a way to do it. But the particular ration that I put together tonight probably lends itself better to more of an Excel spreadsheet type of, and I'll kind of talk about that when we go through it. And then basically performance, looking, so we can do a really good job of putting a ration together, but if the animals don't perform properly, it doesn't work. And so that's why we've got to monitor the animals and look at the performance and look at body condition. We'll spend some slides. I've sent you those slides, and there's slides on that in there as well. And so we'll talk about that some. That's our best way to monitor energy status in the animal. And so, and then we won't talk a whole lot about performance. Jennifer talked about that a lot when she did her presentation last week. But those are important things, and using those as polling parameters as well. So, so to kind of start with, I work a lot with cattle producers, and so we got big round bales, but maybe with sheep and goats, we've got square bales. But basically, if you're using round bales to pull a hay sample, you stick the hay probe inside and pull the sample. If you're using square bales, the long end, you stick it in the side there and drill it in. Those are examples of that there. So I don't know how many of you have actually done hay testing, but that's the first part, is getting a good representative sample. And we talk about that is really the key to getting accurate results, is a good representative sample. And you may want to sample it, and that's the best way. You want to sample it by the best way to cut down on your variation. And so if you've got different species of hay, you want to sample those separately. If you've got them stored differently, you want to sample those separately. If you purchased them differently, now that can be a bit of an issue. Kind of runs into, you may need to take multiple samples throughout the year, and we're talking about hay here, but when you're also, if you're doing feed testing and things like that, you may need to take multiple samples as well throughout the year to get a good representation of what you're feeding. And so, and when you sample about 10% of your resources or hay resources, and so if you have, say you have 100 bales of a certain hay species, you need to take samples from about 10 bales, and then basically mix that up in a 5-gallon bucket or in a plastic bucket, mix that up real good, and then take out a grab sample of about 2 to 3 cups. And that would be what you would send off. And when we, down here in Southwest Missouri, the labs that we use, the lab that we use for the most part is Custom Labs out of Monette. But all around the country, there's various forage testing labs, and basically you can go online and search as far as which labs you want to use, and if they're you want to use a lab that's National Forage Testing Association accredited lab. And so basically that's what you want to do. You can get forms. You can work with your extension specialist, work with us on the correct analysis and information that you need to get back. If you've got an email, which pretty much everybody that's homeless has one, um, you can use that email to get the results back a little faster. Um, Basically, as far as sending to the lab, work with the lab on how they'd like to receive it and then send it that way. And of course, if you have any questions, you can always work with an extension specialist in your area, or if you're in Missouri, and MU Livestock Extension. MU Extension Livestock Field Specialist would be good for that. So, but when you look at that sheet that I sent you that has the forage testing information on it, and I'll actually show a sheet here in a little bit, but it's got two columns. And those two columns, you've got the as-fed column and you got the dry column. And when you look at those two columns, the one that you're going to look at the most, or one's the most important really, is the dry side column. Because that's the column you're going to use in comparison for calculation, ration development, all those things. And then your percent dry matter, once you're done, and I'll show this later, once you're done, you'll use that percent dry matter to convert those amounts that you put into your ration back to what you'll actually feed. And then we'll actually look at the fact that you'll want to account for some waste in that as well. So that's and so here's an example of that, what I was talking about, those two columns. You have the as is or as fed column right here. And then you've also got the dry column over here. And I mean, we've got your moisture right there. Your crude protein, which, like I said, we're looking at this side, your crude protein, and that'll be your protein value, and we'll talk about protein. Your fibers, acid detergent fiber, neutral detergent fiber, the percentage of these is actually a representation of what's left over after digestion has taken place of these in the animal. And so the higher these percentages are for acid detergent fiber, the higher that percentage is, the less digestible that forage is. And for neutral detergent fiber, the higher the percentage of that is, that means the more neutral detergent fiber, the more of that particular fiber that's involved in that digestion is left over. And so that means that would be less intake from that. Here's all the energy values. Just for simplicity's sake, we use total digestible nutrients, which when you look at that, that's actually more than energy, but that's a good representation of energy. These net energy, lactation, gain, maintenance, those are actual energy values, but we use total digestible nutrients in the development of rations because it's a good representation of energy, and it's very simplified. And then nitrogen times 6.25 equals crude protein. And so that's where your crude protein measurement comes from. And then we have our various minerals down here. Relative feed value is actually a index we use, and they'll use this. And basically this is the quality of the hay, and the higher this relative feed value is, the higher the quality of the hay is. And really that relative feed value is good if you're selling hay. It's not really very useful from a nutrition and development of the ration standpoint. Nitrate, that can be a toxin to the animal, and I'm not going to talk much about that tonight, because that is something. And if the feed stuff happens to be high in nitrate, there's certain feed stuffs that through drought and stuff have the potential to be high in nitrate, then we have to adjust the ration based on that. So that's a good. And I sent you another copy of this in those documents I sent this afternoon. Kind of go through this. So kind of went through all of these already. One of the things I didn't touch much on is our minerals, our vitamins, our trace minerals. And basically from that standpoint, we're going to look at a lot of calcium and phosphorus. Calcium is real important in late gestation and lactation and maintaining that 2-to-1 ratio. Not to take anything away from the rest of the minerals, trace minerals, and vitamins. We'll talk a little bit about selenium and vitamin E as well. That's an important one as well from a trace mineral standpoint. But I'm not a mineral or a vitamin or a trace mineral nutritionist. Some people are. I would just suggest that work with your local feed service. Work with them on getting a free choice mineral that fits what you're feeding, and then also provide that out free choice. And you can either have it loose or block, keep it dry, and just make sure it's available all the time. And there might be times when you have deficiencies, and we'll talk about that a little bit or later. And at those times, then if you're seeing the symptoms of those deficiencies, then you probably need to work with the veterinarian and identify, take tissue samples and different samples and identify what those deficiencies are, and then make an adjustment to that mineral based on those deficiencies. And so main things we're going to focus on tonight, those calcium and phosphorus ratio, because with late gestation, early lactation, those are very important. So with that, are there any questions on forage testing before we move on? Jennifer, were there any questions? No questions?
I don't see any right now yet.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I throw this slide in here, and this is an important thing to think about when you're buying supplements. And this actually comes from, I believe, a Montana guide sheet, but cost of the supplement and cost on a per TDN basis, which would be energy, consider that energy, and a percent crude protein basis, which we would consider protein, obviously. And so this just kind of goes through that. It's when we're talking about supplements, it's a good idea when you're purchasing supplements and looking at that to compare these on them. And the way this is the best way to compare them is to really convert that down to a dry matter basis, which is in both of these. What they've done is they've converted that to dry matter per ton, and then from that this is a 75% TDN, so they've converted that to pounds of TDN and 38% crude protein. So on the other side, they've converted the crude protein. And then what they've done is they've taken the price and divided that by the pounds of TDN or the pounds of crude protein to get you on the price per pound of TDN and the price per pound of crude protein. And so when we're comparing these feedstuffs, it's a good way. This is a good way to look at that and try to incorporate the lowest cost supplement in your operation, which is obviously going to save you some money. So that's just kind of an example of how you would do that and go about things. So with that, we're going to move now and kind of go through some nutrition discussion about late gestation and early lactation nutrition, and then we'll talk more about ration development and some other things there a little bit later. But basically, when we move into late gestation, what's happening? Well, obvious, there's fetal development taking place, and most of that fetal development takes place in late gestation. And so there's some udder development. Certain species, whether it's sheep or goats, put on a little more udder development in late gestation than others, but that's taking place. Also, another thing that's taking place because of that fetal development is rumen capacity. And so we talk about, well, one way that intake is reduced, we talked about the fibers and the fact that if there's more of those being left over in the rumen, that's going to reduce intake. Well, another thing that reduces intake is as those fetuses grow, that rumen capacity gets smaller, and that intake that causes reduction in intake. So all of these things lead to the fact that she needs a little more nutrition in late gestation. Now she'll even need more when we get into lactation, but she needs a little higher quality nutrition in late gestation, because when especially when intake reduction happens, what has to happen? Well, the energy density or the nutrient density of the diet has to increase in order to still satisfy those needs that she has, and she has a lot of needs. She has fetal growth needs. She's got mammary development needs. We also want to make sure that she is fed properly in late gestation so we can help to prevent things like pregnancy toxemia, which is ketosis, milk fever. We also want good nutrition in late gestation, because we said that's when fetal growth's taking place. So if we want good offspring, healthy offspring, strong offspring, we need good nutrition in late gestation. And so when we look at our feeding plan, when we get into late gestation, we probably need to improve the quality of our forage to some extent. We probably also maybe need to supplement a little bit of energy and a little bit of protein and maybe a little bit of calcium, depending on what we're feeding. As we're moving into the winter, moving from the fall into the winter months, we're feeding more dormant forages, or maybe grazing more dormant forages. There's a possibility that we're going to need to supplement those things because they're not as high quality. And so when we look at energy supplementation, probably when we look at energy supplementation, probably our main source is going to be corn. I throw that in there as a grain. There's other grains, but when we look at energy density, corn's going to be pretty much from a grain standpoint, it's going to be the highest. One of the problems with corn is that it's high in phosphorus and it's low in calcium, and so that kind of goes against what we're trying to do from the calcium to phosphorus ratio standpoint. And so if we're having to supplement a lot in late gestation, then we may need to add some calcium or in the form of either limestone or calcium carbonate to balance that out. And I throw this in here, especially in cattle rations, and I think this is probably similar in sheep and goats. We don't want to put too much corn in the diet, too much starch in the diet, because what that's going to do is that's going to change the rumen microbes and the rumen bugs around, and that's going to cause. And we want to try to get as much forage digestion in these animals as much as possible. And so from that standpoint, we want the rumen to want to digest forage, and if we put too much starch in the diet, we're causing those rumen microbes to change to where they don't want to digest forage as much. And basically what we do is we lower the pH, and that changes the rumen bugs and the rumen microbes around, and that can affect our intake of forage, and that can affect our digestion of forage. And so when we look at the ration later, I was a little over 0.5%, but I kind of had to be because of where we were at from an energy standpoint. But we want to try to stay low in that regard. Some other byproducts that work well from an energy standpoint are soy hulls, corn gluten feed, dried distillers grains and solubles, and wheat midds. I'm actually using soy hulls in the ration later because of their fiber source as well. Sometimes with the distillers grains and the corn gluten feed, sheep and goats may not like those as well, and so they're also very low in calcium versus phosphorus. So if we utilize those, we're going to have to adjust with some calcium carbonate. Soy hulls are a legume byproduct, and so when they're a legume byproduct, they're high in calcium, low in phosphorus, because legumes are typically high in calcium, low in phosphorus. So we touched on pregnancy toxemia, but this is a little bit more information on that. Basically, ketosis, and it's due to energy deficiency, late gestation. It can be in lactation as well. Those females, obviously, if they're carrying more fetuses, or if they're and even if they're fat, because basically what it is it's an energy metabolism metabolic disorder. So either you don't have the energy available in the animal, and so they go ketotic, or you have they're fat and they're not their system is not set up to mobilize that energy, and so they also go ketonic. And so both sides of that. So that's why it's important to have those females in the right condition as they go into lactation, so that you can kind of help prevent ketosis, because it can either be thin animals or it can be fat animals. And so energy supplementation, late gestation, helps reduce that incidence. Moving to protein supplementation. Basically, and we'll show a diet ration later. Protein supplementation in Missouri, in Southwest Missouri, is not as big of a deal. We also, because of our forages, because of our energy supplements, we don't have as much of a protein deficiency. Now, if you're in other parts of the country, you may have that issue, and so you may need to supplement protein more. And so some things that make good protein supplements are alfalfa, legume hays. Besides the fact that most of them are high in calcium, they're also for the most part, high in protein as well. Some byproduct supplements, soybean meal, that would be one. Again, you get the distillers grains and solubles there, cottonseed meal. Some parts of the country that's more readily available than Southwest Missouri, if you have cotton production. But distillers grains and solubles, that's another one. It's an energy as well as a protein supplement. All of these are going to be pretty low in calcium to phosphorus ratio. And so probably looking at that, if we're adding those, we're looking at adding some calcium to balance that out. There has been, I read some stuff where supplementation of bypass protein might help with resistance to internal parasites. Also with bypass protein, it basically, what it does is it bypasses the rumen, and it goes to the stomach, the true stomach, which is the abomasum in a sheep and a goat. Goes to the lower GI tract, it's digested and broken down. And so there's some thought that if we bypass the rumen with some of this protein, with some of these amino acids, that may actually, which amino acids are actually the building blocks of protein. They help to build, basically a protein is a combination of amino acids. And so when we bypass the rumen, there's some thought there that may improve productivity as well. So some sources that are high in bypass protein are corn gluten meal, fish meal, feather meal. There's others as well. So, but in any case, and this would be true with energy as well, but with protein, make sure supplementation is cost effective, and that should be said with any of these supplements, any of these aids. We need to be cognizant of what it's costing us, and it seems like every day it's getting more expensive. So we need to be cognizant of that and make sure that what we're doing is cost effective from a supplementation standpoint. And if it's not, then we need to adjust our production system in some way. This is in late gestation, calcium supplementation. And so we talked a little bit about that earlier, but really what we're trying to do here is prevent milk fever. Also, as those fetuses develop, they need the calcium for bone development. Um, and you can see their non-dairy ewes, their highest is in late calcium needs in late gestation. Your does, dairy does highest during lactation. The main thing here is we don't want to underfeed or overfeed, somewhere in that 2-to-1 ratio of calcium to phosphorus, or 1 to 2 to 1. And so, and I, especially on these females, I'd be pushing more to that 2-to-1, because they're going to be using a lot of calcium as they go through lactation. It says there at the bottom, if we're utilizing low quality forage, because that's what we have, we're probably going to need something. Late gestation nutrition, we've kind of talked about a little bit of this already. One of the things that didn't talk about was colostrum quantity and quality, but basically, if we're not providing the nutrition to those females in late gestation, those things that take place in late gestation, they're not going to develop properly. I mean, one of those things is colostrum development, and so quantity and quality is going to be our offspring. We kind of already their offspring. We already talked about that. They're going to be small, weak, and can lead to mortality. Got the pregnancy toxemia. And also, if we've got wool sheep, we can reduce wool production. And because we're starting out in a low production state on those females, especially we're selling those kids and those lambs by weight. If we're starting out in low production because of our feeding management, then they're not going to wean as much. And so, but we also don't want to be too heavy, overfeed, because what happens if we overfeed is we get them too fat, and being too fat is probably just as bad as being too thin. And you can see here, we can have dystocia issues. We can have oversized fetuses, malpresentation of fetuses, too much fat that they just can't get the fetuses out, and that's a problem as well. And so we'll talk about body condition later and kind of where we want to be. And so that's kind of your measuring stick as far as, are we feeding too much or are we feeding not enough? And so some kind of general feeding management things, and I have late gestation here, but these could be anytime, is we want to make sure that we've got adequate feeder space and minimize wastage from a feeding standpoint. So don't be feeding them on the ground. Have them in a good, if we're feeding supplement, feed them in a good feeder, those kind of things, so we're not wasting. We've got good feeder space. Try some separation based on young ones versus older ones, behavior. If you've got some that are a little more timid than others, and they want to feed them a little separately than the others, because it's going to be harder for them to get some good food. Separate the feed and water for exercise. That's one thing in late gestation. We want plenty of exercise. If we don't get enough exercise, that can lead to some constipation and things like that, and having a hard time getting those fetuses out. And then water needs are going to increase as we go into late gestation, lactation, so kind of plan accordingly there. We're talking about trace minerals, selenium and vitamin E, and so these are important in late gestation to make sure that we have proper amount, and because that selenium is going across the placenta to the fetus, the lambs or the kids that are growing, and if they're deficient when they're born, that can lead to white muscle disease. And so, and I've heard people Missouri is not really a state that's known for selenium deficiency, but I've heard of people that sometimes have some symptoms that seem like that. And so that's where I come back to say, well, if you've got symptoms of deficiency in selenium or any other trace mineral or vitamin or whatever, you've got symptoms that kind of look like that, you might work with your veterinarian, do some tissue samples and determine if you really have a deficiency, and then find a way to remedy that deficiency. And one thing with selenium, though, is there is a narrow margin between requirement and toxicity. And the thing with selenium toxicity is it can kill the animal. So, and it doesn't take much for it to happen. So, you want to be careful as far as selenium supplementation. But again, these are important: late gestation, injection, supplementation preferred over injection. So also coccidiostats. And so Bovatex good for sheep, Vincent's good for goats, Decox is good for non-lactating sheep and goats. And so this is a way to keep to help reduce coccidia in your lambing and kidding environment, which coccidia can be a big issue when you look at young ones. And so it's one thing you want to try to do. Talk about putting in the feeder the mineral. If you're supplementing, I would put it in the feed where they get daily intake. Sometimes with mineral, they may not get minerals. Sometimes are not consistent on daily intake. And I know with these coccidiostats, they need consistent daily intake. And sometimes minerals are not consistent daily intake. And so I would lend more to putting it in your supplement daily if they get it daily. Another thing that Gary mentioned is that toxoplasmosis can cause abortions, and Vincent's a way to prevent that. One thing you do have to watch with the Vincent and Bovatec are they toxic to equine, and so some people use donkeys as guard animals, so that can be an issue. Vincent's also toxic to dogs, and a lot of people use dogs as guard animals, so that can be an issue. And so kind of have to work around that, or maybe you got to do something like that. And then as far as in the animal, these can be toxic if you don't mix them in incorrectly. So if you mix incorrectly these into the diet, they can be toxic if you put too much. So basically, if you don't get daily intake or you don't put enough, you don't get the response. If you put too much, it can be toxic and it can be a problem. As far as antibiotics, we're now in a situation where you need veterinary approval for feeding antibiotics, and so that's something you need to work out with your veterinarian, and also for tetracycline. Really, any antibiotics you've got to work out with your veterinarian as far as the treatment. But if you have Vibrio or Enzotic, which can cause abortions, or tetracycline helps in prevention of that. So helps in treatment of that. But again, you need to be working with your veterinarian on getting approval for that. So any questions on late gestation nutrition before we move on?
Not so far, unless somebody wants to put their hand up. I haven't seen any.
Anybody want to put their hand up?
And you can raise your hand by going down to the reactions button. And they're down there at the very bottom on the far right, at least on my program of Zoom. You can raise your hand if you'd like to.
Mine's actually top. Susan, you can hear me fine, can't you?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you're doing good.
Okay. So,
I don't see,
okay, well, what?
I don't see any hands up, so I guess.
Okay. Well, we'll move on then. I throw this slide in here about colostrum, and colostrum's an important thing as we move into lambing and kidding, because sometimes you're going to have that issue where you're going to need some colostrum, and really you need to plan for that. Now, obviously, the best source for colostrum is the dam, but sometimes that may not be an option, and so if you've got an older female in the same flock, that's all right. Colostrum replacers that contain IgG are good. Now we get to move into other farms, and and there's a possibility of cow colostrum. That becomes an issue because if we're going to other farms, there is a bit of disease risk there. Also, if we're stuck and all we got is cow colostrum, there's a bit of an issue there because it's not quite the same, and it's lowered fat, and you're going to have to feed more of it. But probably those top three there are, if we need colostrum, those are probably the best options. So, but it's a good idea to plan ahead of time and get ready if you need that, because it's kind of hard to get it when you need it if you don't already have a plan for it. So we talk about nutritional management during lactation. A lot of these things will be similar to what we talked about during late gestation. And again, we need more nutrition. These females have just had their lambs or their kids, probably multiples, hopefully. And so there's a lot of need. And if we don't deal with that and negative energy balance, I'll talk about that some. Basically, that's the point when the female can't eat enough to meet her energy needs, and so she goes to the point that she's got to pull energy off her back in the form. She basically loses body condition in order to satisfy that energy, and so we have to deal with that. And in order to prevent ketosis, in order to prevent milk fever, basically she's milking now, and so she's going to need a lot more energy to satisfy those needs from that standpoint, depending on how many little ones she actually has. And so, in the sense of lactation, a lot of times, most of the time, energy is going to be deficient. That's the point. Now, nutrient requirements and that sheet that I sent you from, I think it's Alabama A&M and Auburn, and the extension guide, it talks a lot about nutrient requirements and shows a lot about nutrient requirements. And basically, one of the things we'll show tonight in the ration that we'll show you is a ewe. It's about midweight ewe that's got 2 lambs on it. So basically, when you go and you can look through that sheet, when you go just the number of offspring, that increases the need for body size. Body size is probably one of the main things that determines maintenance energy needs, whether she's a really young ewe or doe or a really old ewe or doe. Because if she's younger and she's still growing and she's having to do all of this work to raise these kids and these lambs, she's going to have, and besides the fact that she's smaller body sized, she's going to have a different energy requirement or a different protein requirement, a different need than a female that's already matured out. And really all she's doing is when she has those lambs for those kids, putting that energy into in the milk production for those lambs for kids. There's also some differences between sheep and goats. And so nutrient requirements vary by a lot of things. Again, when we talk about late gestation, We talked about energy, protein, and calcium, and during lactation, those are going to be the things that we're going to talk about again for the most part. One thing, as you're increasing grain supplementation, you want to do that incrementally. You want to do that slowly so you don't get some rumen upsets, especially if they're not used to it. So, when we look at nutritional management during lactation, some things to think about. I mean, milk's composed, you can see there, water, fat, protein, calcium, minerals, and milk sugar. All that stuff's got to be replenished from the diet to make that. And so that leads to a high nutritional demand. She needs a lot of water. That nursing stimuli leads to that milk production. So the more offspring she's nursing, the more milk production she needs. And she only has so much room to intake. And so we need a more, if we're going to work to keep her out of that or reduce that level of negative energy balance, then we're going to have to feed a higher quality feed, a more nutrient dense feed to meet those needs, because she only has so much intake that she can have. And so, and this would be a hard thing to do, but if possible, if you have the ability to separating the ones that have more offspring and the ones that don't have as much offspring, like the ones that have singles versus the ones that have doubles or triples or whatever, trying to separate them off and feed them separately, that would help from an efficiency standpoint. Now, from a management and production standpoint, that may not be possible, I understand, but that is one way to try to manage those differently and provide a little higher nutrient, provide more nutrition to those that need a little bit more. I think we pretty much already kind of talked about this, but one thing I will bring out in this slide, if you've got females that are fat at the end at weaning time, it might be something to look at from a productivity standpoint. Jennifer talked some about this last week, but if we've got females that are really fat at weaning time, that might mean that they're not putting much into their offspring, and that's what we sell out of them. And so we want them to do a good job there. We want them to maintain. We don't want them to lose too much. We want them to maintain, but we also don't want them to be real fat either, because that may be a product of the fact that they're just not doing a very good job as mothers. And so that's something to keep in mind and that could be something from a culling standpoint as well. This is just kind of a rule of thumb, and we'll actually circle back to this later when we look at rations, but this just kind of shows you the difference in need from singles to twins. And I believe this is on sheet. This just kind of shows you that difference. So that with more offspring, they're probably going to eat a little bit more. They need a little bit more. TDN's about the same. They need a little bit more protein, need a little bit more calcium, a little bit more phosphorus. With water, obviously, they need plenty of that. And the cleaner it is, the better they're going to consume. In the winter months, it may be a little cold for them, and so you might want to heat that. That might encourage consumption a little bit. We talk about bunk management. It's kind of things we already talked about, but I did mention that don't feed on the ground. That can lead to some wastage, and so that's also, if we've got parasites on the ground, that can be an issue too. So that's a couple of reasons why we don't want to feed on the ground like that. So, milk fever. This is just another thing and something we try to prevent in late gestation, and basically that calcium requirement goes up, and so that's a good That's why we want to maintain or have a proper calcium in the diet. Basically, we look at treatment really as far as a veterinarian. You want to consult your veterinarian and have a plan in place. A lot of times, that's something you need to be planning for ahead of time. Also, we talk about different injections of calcium. There you can see if they have normal calcium levels and you give intravenous injection calcium, that can kill them. And so we want to be cognizant of that. Most of the time, if you're giving intravenous injections, probably the veterinarian's involved anyways. And so that's just something to watch. And basically, if that animal goes from shivering to right by end of treatment, that's a good thing. If they don't, then you may have your diagnosis incorrect, or it may be complicated by another disease. And so that's why a lot of these things, it's a good idea to have a veterinarian involved to help you work through some of these things. One of the things, and we'll show this in the ration later, one of the things we did with in your lactation ration is one of the ways to get that calcium up is to put a legume hay in there and alfalfa. Some people may not have alfalfa, but a lot of our legume hays are high in calcium, and so incorporating the legume hay in during lactation is a good thing to help with that. Also, our calcium supplements. Main thing is if we're supplementing grain, main thing is incorporating those in. Actually, the ration I put together tonight, we didn't have to add any, probably because we used soy hulls and we used alfalfa, and so and we didn't have to use near as much corn or other products that are high in phosphorus compared to calcium. So but that's something new. One thing, and I don't hear a lot about this, but this can happen, is called periparturient egg rise. And basically what it is during late gestation through early part of lactation, those females possibly lose immunity to parasites. And so they have parasite issues. And this can be a big issue. And where we do a lot of spring lambing and kidding, this can be an issue because it coincides with that increase in larvae and worm eggs. And so you kind of have to plan around that. One of the things, and I would say from a worming standpoint, others like Susan or Jennifer can comment on this, but really we, this is a whole nother talk in itself, but we talk about parasite control. We really need to have some sort of plan, whether it's Stomatia, 5-point check's another one, where we identify those females that have worm problems and then treat them accordingly. And if they consistently have worm problems, then they're probably an animal that needs to find another home, because those can be issues, and those are things that just progress through the herd. But ways to counter this issue where basically they lose their temporary immunity loss to parasites is deworming females in late pregnancy, determining, or another one, and probably the more proper one, is to determine those females that have a problem and treat them and leave the others alone. Because what happens is if you blanket treatment, sometimes you start building resistance, and then you have a problem when then it leads to worse problems that you can't deal with from a treatment standpoint. Some other things, like I said earlier, increasing protein level in late gestation may help. Bypass protein may show some benefits. Probably one of the things that is just move the lambing and kidding season to either the winter or the fall, where we're not having parasite issues. And then you can just maintain them in a dry lot until that period's over. So,
Also,
that-
Patrick,
yes,
we want to be careful and be sure to read the label on our dewormers, because the wrong dewormer can cause abortion. So
okay, yeah,
be sure you know which one you're giving your animals. Read that label and know about withdrawal periods.
that is correct. And weigh your animals. Know how much they weigh. So undertreating and undertreating can sometimes lead to parasite resistance. The amount can sometimes lead to some parasite resistance as well. But yeah, you're right. Read the label. So kind of wrap this section up a little bit, really, and we've talked about a lot of this stuff, but your do's and don'ts during lactation. And so proper nutrient intake, proper calcium intake, some exercise. On our wool breeds, cleaning them up, crushing them, shearing them, deworming really, and deworming as needed. Facilities in good repair. We didn't really talk much about that tonight, but keep those facilities in good repair. Monitor for mastitis and treat. That's probably more in the dairy side of things, but could be in the meat side of things as well. And then body condition scores we'll touch on at the end. And then don'ts, and these may seem obvious, but basically don't do any mixing. Don't bring any new animals in, any potential disease or parasite issues. Don't mix your ewe lamb doelings with your mature females. Don't mix lactating and dry females. A lot of this trying to keep them separated really helps from an efficiency standpoint, because if you're mixing animals with significantly different nutrient requirements, what's happening is that you have females that are getting too much, and that's really you're wasting feed on them to meet the needs of the ones that really need it. And so that's just something that you need to, because that'll help cut down some of the costs from a feeding standpoint. And then over and under feeding, work to keep in that sweet spot from a feeding standpoint. And then reducing stress, and especially late lactation, late gestation into lactation. The stress can lead to a lot of health problems in those females, and so reducing stress is helpful as well. So, any questions on nutrition related to late gestation, lactation, or any in general?
I don't see any just yet.
Okay.
And it's about 3 minutes past 8.
Okay. We're getting there.
Just didn't want you to go over too much, but I
Okay.
leave enough time for questions and
Yeah. So I'll just kind of go through this ration balancing and real quick. And so we've kind of talked about some of this as basically you start out by what are we feeding, and we'll go through all of these. Basically, what are we feeding? What are that animal's requirements? What do we have available, and we have on those feedstuffs. And then, as I said, there's multiple ways you can put a ration together. I'm going to use an Excel spreadsheet tonight. Based on what ingredients you have, it might determine what you use. And then, as I said, we'll talk about body condition, but really we can put the ration together on paper and it looks fine, but we need to monitor the animal performance and adjust as needed, because that's the important part. And so we look at the animal. I picked, and this is in that document, that nutrient requirements document I sent you, but 154-pound ewe that's lactating twins, and that's what her requirements are. And so, and then we have like our dry matter, our TDN, our crude protein, our calcium, our phosphorus, and so that would be what you would take off of that. If you had a sheet that you had analyzed all those feedstuffs. In Southwest Missouri, basically what I use and what a lot of our pastures are a fescue clover or a fescue legume mix. And so about 2/3 fescue, a third of a legume. I just picked clover. Alfalfa, I kind of used a poorer quality alfalfa, not mature, but close to. Corn, soybean hulls, soybean meal, and limestone. Those are common ingredients. The corn and the soy hulls would be for energy, and the soybean meal would be for protein. Limestone would be for calcium. And so go through the ration, and the way you would start is you would look at energy, and you would, and this is basically our pounds. And so we always start from a dry matter basis on how many pounds we're going to put in on a dry matter basis. The sheet says that female can eat about 6.2 pounds of dry matter. And so basically we put in enough of each of those ingredients to get so many pounds of TDN. Our requirement was 4. And as we go back to that rule of thumb slide, about 65% TDN. So that's, and like I said, I used corn and soy hulls. We didn't need any extra added protein, so I didn't add any soybean. Then we moved to crude protein. And actually, I think the requirement was 0.92, so we got 0.95. And basically, see their same amounts. And that's kind of simplistically how we do that. And then we look at calcium and phosphorus, and we didn't really need any more added calcium. We had enough. Like I said earlier, I think the combination of the alfalfa and the soybean hulls, because they're high in calcium compared to phosphorus, kind of helped balance that out. And we had plenty, so we didn't need to add any calcium or phosphorus. And so get to the important, one of the important parts is conversion. And so, as I said earlier, basically what you do to convert from pounds of dry matter to pounds of as fed, or what you're actually going to feed, is you take these numbers and divide it by their dry matter percentage. So I believe the fescue clover mix is either 88 or 89% dry matter. And so basically you would take this 292, divide that by 0.88, and that would give you your as fed amount you would actually feed. And then there's always going to be wastage. And so I incorporate about 15% waste in there. So when we put in the waste, we actually subtract that. So we actually subtract that from 100%. So when I did that then converted that, we divide this number, the pounds as fed, by 0.85 to get, and you would do that on, not exactly the same on all these, but basically you would subtract what you think the amount of waste would be. On the hays, I put 15%. On the grain, or on the supplements, I put 5%. So basically you went from roughly about 6.25 pounds dry matter to about 7 pounds as fed to about 8 pounds total of as fed plus waste. And when we look at our supplement, I just broke that out again. That's about a 50, set that up to be about a 50% corn soy hull supplement. So that's, and we'd be feeding about 2 pounds of supplement with the roughly 2 pounds of alfalfa and about 4 pounds of the other hay. That's kind of a basic way of doing it. We go back and we talked about our ionophores, or our coccidiostats. Those, you would put those in if you were going to feed those daily. You would put those into this supplement, and it's a very small amount, so you would just adjust corn a little bit on that in that regard to incorporate that in. So, any questions on that before we move on?
No, not so far.
Okay. So moving to the body condition score, and so we talked about the ration, we talked about the energy, the protein, vitamins and minerals, all those things. Now, this is one way that we would monitor energy status in the animal, or is our diet working? Basically, are we providing enough nutrition to that female? She's maintaining energy in a proper way, and this is the way that we can evaluate that, and that's through body condition. Our basically that scoring system's a 1 to 5, where you're looking at the backbone and the ribs, and we've got pictures of that, so I'll show those to you. About a 1 to 5 scale, where 1 is extremely thin, and 5 is extremely fat, and 3 is just about right. And so our optimum range is about 2 to 4, and we'll go through those. And so as you can see here, this is a 1. You can see a lot of, we call it weak and bony. These are goat pictures from Langston University in Oklahoma. But you can see there, we call it weak and bony. You can see all kinds of rib, you can see all kinds of backbone really indented in there. This is a very thin animal. And so that would be the bottom, or that would be considered emaciated. And then get to 2, and 2 is kind of the bottom end of our optimum range. You can see there, it's definitely not as thin as the previous one. You can still see some ribs, some backbone, but there's not as much indentation, and they obviously don't look as thin. And so that's, we'll say at weaning time, that's kind of as thin as we want them. Maintenance, and that's kind of the bottom as we move back towards breeding, and then on again to kidding and lambing. We move up from there. And then you see a 3 here. You don't hardly see any ribs at all anymore. Backbone, you still see a little bit of backbone, but it's definitely not as prominent as it was before. But you don't see any ribs, you don't see any indentions like you saw in the previous 2 pictures. So this is an average, or kind of the middle of the road. And then we move to 4. As I look at this picture, it's just a really smooth picture. You don't really see, even when you go back here, you see a little bit of indentation, you can kind of see a little bit of roughness there. But when you move to a 4, it's just a nice smooth cover over the top there. Don't see any rib, don't see any indentation really. You got to really push hard to feel those ribs and those backbones. On the backbone of the ribs. And then you move to a 5, and basically it's a little bit harder to see the increase in fat here. But really what's going to happen once you get to that 5 is that back line's going to get square, and the fat's going to start stacking. And you can probably see that a little bit. But basically what you're going to start seeing is you're going to start seeing fat clogs, and it just starts stacking over the back. We're not feeling any backbone or ribs anymore. So that's kind of a quick overview of body condition. It's a lot. If we had them in person, it'd be a lot easier to tell that 5 versus that 4. So, and then I kind of touched on this, but kind of our bottom where we want to be at weaning times of 2, and then we're going to kind of work those females back from a 2 to. And I didn't talk really much about breeding tonight, but we're going to provide some extra nutrition there prior to breeding to help improve our lambing or our kidding crop a little bit, and that's going to push that condition back up a little bit to about a 3. Then we just kind of want to maintain there about that 2+3 area in early gestation, and then as we move to late gestation, we want that solid 3, and kind of pushing upward and until we get to lambing. And again, we don't want to be too fat going into lambing because that can lead to some problems, or kidding, but we kind of want to stay in that 3 to 4 range. With that, kind of as a wrap up, basically we went through putting a ration together for our late gestation ewes and does, our early lactation ewes and does. Looked at the feeding strategy, looked at the body condition. Jennifer kind of talked about the record keeping and monitoring performance last week, but that kind of falls in again on this. As far as we need to watch those females, monitor those females, make sure that we're providing them the proper nutrition for them to perform, and then identify those females that are not performing well, even though we are providing them the proper nutrition, and make changes as needed with those females. Or if we see an issue if we see an issue in our feeding strategy, then make changes according there as well. So, and there's three of us on this Zoom that over the last 3 weeks that have some knowledge in this area, obviously, and be very happy to talk with you and help you. If you have questions, just call or email us. And so there's my email address, and I've emailed you plenty over the last few weeks. And so again, I want to thank you all for being on tonight. I want to thank you all for being on the last 3 weeks. And I'll try to answer, or any of us will try to answer any questions that you have.
Yes, Patrick, we've been having a little bit of a back discussion here on the chat about looking at body condition scores. And Jennifer reminded everybody that you need to get your hands on those animals, especially sheep with wool or any kind of a heavier coat, because it's difficult to see their body condition just by looking at them. Goats, if they're a nice smooth-haired goat, you probably be able to see body condition from a distance. But when you have sheep, you probably really need to have some hands on them and check for all those structures that we want to look for.
Yes, that would be true. Didn't touch on that. That's very important. If there's plenty of winter coat or wool, and honestly, I do a lot of cattle. I feel them, even though they're slick sheared. I feel them if I can. I know some people that require, in the cattle standpoint, that requires getting out of the truck sometimes, or things like that.
Yeah,
that's not, but that is true with sheep and goats. With sheep especially, you need to feel them because that can be hard to see.
and there's lots of photos of what the scoring should look like online. You can get those from most universities have a set of photos, or they use the ones from Langston. Langston has some really good photos there. You can check with Susan Shanian. She's up on the East Coast, and I believe hers is sheepandgoats.com. And that will get you quite a lot of information, but you can find her body condition score photos there. And she also does FAMACHA and shows you how to do FAMACHA. And that's also another thing people can look up online and learn how to do that quite well.
Actually, a lot of this information came from Susan Shane, her website, sheepandgoat.com. And so that is a very good resource, has a lot of good resources on there for you. And I go there a lot.
Jennifer, did you have something?
Yeah. How many people would be interested to do a hands-on clinic to do maybe hoof trimming or body condition scoring or things like that? And then the best question of all is, you know, this has been a Zoom and we've got a wide, diverse audience on here, is what kind of location would you want that at? You know, what general part of Missouri would you like to see that at?
Got a lot of yeses already.
And one other question, did anybody get to attend Lincoln's field day that they had this last week? You may have to answer yes to different questions differently. And I don't know if you saw that other question. Is there a way to test your pasture diversity and nutrition?
Yes. The diversity part, you just really need to look. But the nutrition part, yes. And you could take forage clippings, and it would be a similar process to hay testing. It would just be forage clippings, and we do some of that. People probably should do it more. But if you want more information on that, because I don't, there's a square involved in size, and I don't know it right off the top of my head. But if you want more information on that, send me an email, and I will look to get you more information on that. But it would be the only thing with pasture clippings, and I didn't talk much about this, the only thing with pasture clippings, especially if there's a lot of moisture involved, which during the growing season there will be, you need to freeze those samples before you send them. Wet samples, and then you need to work with the forage testing lab and ask them how they want them sent. Wet samples, if you don't handle them properly, will deteriorate in the shipping process.
Yeah.
And will give you wrong values. So, especially, well, here in Southwest Missouri, with Monette, a lot of people, if they have wet samples, they just take them to the lab directly. But that may not be an option. And so depending on where you're wanting to send them from, where they're going, you may talk to that forage testing lab and ask them how would be the best way to, but if they have a lot of moisture, the best way to store them is to freeze them. Put them in the freezer until you're ready to analyze them. We'll pull them out and let them thaw and dry and do all that.
And you can, if you call the lab, they'll tell you how to do that too. Or they may have a sheet online to tell you the actual steps. So we have somebody asking for fecal testing, and also, let's see, and doing the hands-on. So, and everybody's looking, it looks like quite a few are saying on the western side, or we could probably do a couple of different workshops, couldn't we, Patrick and
We
Joe?
could probably work something out, yep. The western side of Missouri.
Yeah, that's what most of them are saying, but there's some
Okay,
Howell County, which I don't remember if that's in the central or if that's.
West Plains. That would be, yeah. Yeah, we can probably work something out. Just have to get in, but yeah, there's some
Patrick, this
bare
is
grounds.
Patty.
and stuff. Who was
I
that?
was just going to ask if there would be an advantage to going to MU up in Columbia for that, or what does it really matter?
Or,
Yeah,
like,
advantage.
The
testing.
hands-on clinic.
Oh, okay. I mean, we could do it there too. Let's see. Aaron wants to know, my animals forage on a wide variety of species from grasses to forbs and trees. So how do I sample this?
Um,
Well, Aaron, I think that's a complicated question, but if you're grazing and not feeding lots of other supplemental type feeds, then you're going to look more at the animal and see if
Probably, yeah.
getting enough nutrition and see if their rumen is full at the end of the day, and looking at their hair coat. You're going to do the 5-point test basically,
Yeah.
because you're going to need to know how they're doing on those feeds. So it is pretty difficult if they're mostly just grazing. But we can look at body condition scores and things like that to help us decide, even if we can't sample all the different kinds of things.
And I kind of think if the animals have that much to choose from, then they're choosing the best that meets their needs.
Right.
And it's at that point, it's going to be a quantity more than a quality issue if they're not meeting their needs, or maybe it's droughty or something like that, that we might need to think about supplementing. But I certainly wouldn't go out and test all those things to see what they hold. Another way you can do that is that there are some references out there for the nutrients that are found in our common weeds. So that research has been done, so we can kind of estimate that.
Right.
Yeah, Patrick talked about these, but there's actually one out there that talks about a lot of our broadleaf weeds, not necessarily our forages per se, but a lot of our forbs and brushy. And so that's out there too, if you really want to know what's in those on an average basis.
And Aaron, if you're following Greg Judy's grazing plan, your animals are doing well. I try to do about a very similar program to his, and they stay pretty healthy most of the time. And let's see who asked about Rebecca. Rebecca that asked about fecal testing. I'm going to put my email in the chat, and if you will contact me after this, then I will tell you a little more about that if you need it, fecal testing pretty soon. But we can also do a workshop with that.
Is there anything
So,
else?
Susan, you may know this. Dr. Boffman mentioned something Friday about a lab that is doing $5 fecal testing, fecal egg count. Have you heard of that?
No, I didn't. He Usually
That's
about that stuff, so I'm surprised.
that's pretty inexpensive. So
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
we might
That
need
is-
to figure out where that is and send that information out.
yeah. I'll try and ask him about that. I do one too, but you have to mail it to me. So mail it or bring it to me. And in fact, usually I do those on the last Thursday of the month. So, but they have to get to me in the right amount of time so they aren't dried out or ruined by the weather. But you can contact me with that, with my email is in the chat. And if you need to talk more about getting fecals done. And Kimberly Morrison wants to know any resources for beginners out there, infrastructure, facilities, etc. Kimberly, you can contact me as well, or put your email in the chat, and I would be happy to talk that through with you, as Patrick and Jennifer probably would too. But I do help a lot of beginning farmers with those kinds of questions.
And I always come at that from a point of less is good, less is more on that.
Absolutely.
And so there's no need to go out and build that, $20,000 barn.
Yeah.
We have some portable structures that will work really well, especially if you're a beginner and you might be unsure if you're going to stick with sheep and goats. Because it'd be heck to build a 20,000 barn specifically for those animals and then decide you want cattle or something bigger, and then it just doesn't work out well for that.
Yeah.
And then Susan, Rebecca was hoping to do a training to do fecal testing themselves.
Okay. Yeah, I could probably work that out too. Just depends on how far away you are, I guess.
And I don't know if that's something we can incorporate into that hands-on day and just make a day out of it, or.
Yeah, we probably could. I can borrow some more microscopes from Lincoln and do that. If everybody wants to bring fecal samples.
I imagine we'll put something together, and we have an email list of everybody for this, so we might send that out to at least the Missouri participants.
Yeah, we could work that out pretty well. We had one a few years ago. Patrick and I did. We were over closer to central Missouri, I believe, weren't we, Patrick? And
We were, yeah, I've done them various places. Yeah, I think actually we did. I think that one was in Coal Camp, maybe.
or Versailles, yeah, somewhere. over-
Versailles, that's right.
Yeah.
Versailles. It was Versailles.
Okay.
Gene is actually, Gene Schmitz did the FOMACHI class, and I don't remember if we did any scopes that night. May have.
Yeah.
And then we did some stuff. Yeah, it's been a few years ago.
Yeah.
Did some of that. Yeah, it's been a few years ago. I don't remember what we did at them, but I do know that we did some FOMACHI, and I think actually we did one at Versailles, and then I think we did another one at another location.
Oh yeah, down closer to Nevada, wasn't it?
We did. That's been a long time ago. Did one at El Dorado.
El Dorado, yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody asked about weighing animals, and are the tape measures accurate? I usually use either a hanging scale or a walk-on scale. So I don't know if the tape, or I think they have them, don't they? just depends on,
So it's a formula, I believe, that used with just a regular like sewing tape measure.
okay,
And then a formula. And I've never compared the two, so I don't know if the tape is accurate. I would encourage just purchasing a scale. If you've
Yeah.
got larger animals, a walk-on scale is good. Um, there are very inexpensive options out there, like purchasing load bars and building your own if cost is an issue. But then again, there are some no bigger than sheep and goats are. You can get like the dog scales, like what they use at a veterinary clinic, and those
Yeah.
aren't super expensive either. And then for babies, I actually use a luggage scale, a digital luggage scale that you can find at just about any Walmart. I think that's going to be a matter of opinion, Aaron, to
yeah,
find this working head chute that works for you and your operation and your height and build and what you like to do and don't like to do. And I'd encourage you to go to some of the bigger sheep and goat sales across the country. They always have vendors at them that produce these, and kind of compare across them.
yeah, there's lots of different companies. Seidel, isn't that one of the ones that makes some pretty nice ones? You got to really look, and it really does matter what breed you have, you know, whether you have large sheep or small sheep, when you're using head chutes and rotating tilt tables and things like that. Okay, Katahdin, you'd probably fit in most of them. And there's lots of brands out there, but you can also watch on watch out for them, like with on some of the resale type online selling venues. A lot of people look up at, you know, will have options there. They're getting out of the business or whatever. If you buy a secondhand one, please take it to the car wash before you bring it home. Just a little hint there for biosecurity. But yeah, there's lots of options out there. If you need more on that, probably Jennifer or I can help you with that for sure.
We do have a local lady. I say local, she's up north central Missouri, I do believe is where she's at.
Yes. And I couldn't remember her name.
Stegall Fabrication and
Yeah.
Engineering, and she built some neat units.
Yeah.
But again, it's going to come down to preference.
Preference and price. Oh boy. Does anyone have any prices on pasture renting on a per head day basis for sheep?
Not on a per head day basis for sheep. However, Extension does have some resources on pasture rental rates on a cash basis and also on kind of a per cow basis. And if we figure that we get 6 sheep per cow, then you can kind of adjust that to the sheep basis.
About $1 to $1.50 per cow. That's a little high.
And I don't know if it was on a per day basis or if it was on a per year basis. I'd have to go back to the guide sheet and look. But if you do a Google search for MU Extension cash rent, that publication should come up. And we've got a new one. I believe the one that's up on the website now is 2018. We have a new one coming out, should be in the next few weeks.
Okay.
Don't see anything else. Again, I want to thank you all for being on. please fill out that evaluation that I sent you guys. And of course, if you have any other questions or anything, just email us or call us, or we're the best way to get a hold of us. So, and I sent you the slides for tonight, and I'll send you the recording hopefully tomorrow, or the link for the recording tomorrow. So, again, thank you. And if you ever have any suggestions on further workshops, just let us know. Thank you, Susan and Jennifer, for your help in all of this too.
Glad to do it.
Happy to be here.
Talk to you later.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming.